The armored glass of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was a silent, tinted barrier between Arthur Vance and the world he owned. Outside, the city of Vantage, a metropolis that bore his family's name etched onto the cornerstones of its grandest towers, was choked in the humid gridlock of a Monday afternoon. Inside, the climate-controlled air was sterile, scented with the faintest hint of Tuscan leather and the cold, metallic tang of immense wealth. Arthur, a man whose face was more familiar to the readers of Forbes than to the few remaining members of his own family, was in the process of devouring another company. His voice was a low, precise weapon, slicing through the static of the conference call. Leverage the debt facility. I don't care about the optics, Marcus. We're not in the business of making friends. We're in the business of quarterly returns. The pension fund is their problem, not mine. Liquidate it. I want their infrastructure, not their dependents. He listened for a moment, his jaw tight, a muscle twitching just below the sharp line of his cheekbone. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned the sluggish river of cars and pedestrians on the sidewalk. Annoyance was a constant, low-grade hum in his existence, and this traffic jam was turning it into a roar. He was about to snap at his driver, a man named Henderson who had the unfortunate talent of being preternaturally still, when his gaze snagged on a small, pathetic tableau on a nearby park bench. An old woman, her clothes the color of dust and despair, sat huddled into herself, her face a mask of silent, weeping misery. People flowed around her like a river around a stone, their faces averted, their gaits quickened. It was a common sight, the city's human debris. He'd seen it 1,000 times and felt nothing. It was noise, a data point in urban decay statistics. He turned back to his call, dismissing the image. Final offer, Marcus. Not a penny more. If they balk, we walk. But then, a flash of color. A little girl, no older than 6, in a bright yellow raincoat far too warm for the day, had broken away from her mother's grasp. She made a beeline for the weeping woman on the bench. Arthur's eyes narrowed. This was an anomaly, an unexpected variable. The child stopped, her head cocked. Then, with the solemnity of a diplomat, she held out a half-eaten chocolate chip cookie. The old woman flinched, looking up with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. The little girl said something. Arthur couldn't hear the words through the laminated glass, but he saw the woman's posture change, a tremor running through her frail shoulders. The little girl then reached out a tiny hand and gently patted the woman's wrinkled, trembling one. Arthur leaned forward, a strange, unwelcome curiosity piercing his irritation. He pressed the button to lower the window an inch, the city's cacophony rushing in. The little girl's voice, clear and high, cut through the noise. "It's okay," she said, her expression one of profound, unshakable earnestness. "Mommy says that sometimes your heart gets too full of sad, and the tears are just it making room for the happy to come back in." Arthur Vance's world stopped. The voice on the phone, talking about billions, faded into meaninglessness. The city, his city, vanished. All that existed was that one impossible sentence. A sentence he hadn't heard in 30 years, not since his wife Eleanor had whispered it to their dying daughter, Lily. His Lily. A choked, ragged sound ripped from his throat, a sound he didn't recognize as his own. The phone slipped from his numb fingers, clattering onto the plush floor mat. Henderson's eyes met his in the rearview mirror, wide with alarm. For the first time in 3 decades, Arthur Vance, the titan of industry, the man who moved markets with a whisper, was crying. He wasn't just crying. He was broken open, the silent, ugly sobs of a man who had forgotten how. The little girl in the yellow raincoat had just taken a key he didn't know he'd lost and unlocked the sealed mausoleum of his heart. And the ghost that flew out was a grief so vast and so old, it threatened to swallow him whole. The immediate aftermath was a blur of disconnected sensations. Henderson's panicked voice. "Mr. Vance." "Sir, are you all right?" The blare of a horn from the car behind them as traffic began to inch forward. The cool leather against his cheek as he slumped against the seat, his hand pressed to his mouth to stifle the raw animal sounds escaping him. He fought for control, the habit of a lifetime warring with the sudden, violent insurrection of his soul. He wrestled the grief back down, shoving it into the dark corners where it had festered for so long, but the locks were broken. It was a temporary truce at best. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic and calculated risks, was in chaos. The little girl, her words. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a cosmic impossibility, a statistical absurdity that defied every rational principle he lived by. Eleanor had created that phrase, a gentle fiction crafted for their own 6-year-old, a way to explain the tears that came as they faced the inevitable. It was a family secret, a piece of sacred, lost language. To hear it spoken now, by a stranger's child on a dirty city street, it felt like a violation, a miracle, a nightmare. "Stop the car," he rasped, his voice raw. "Sir, we're in the middle of the street," Henderson began, his professionalism struggling against his concern. "Now, Henderson, stop it now." The command was absolute. The Rolls-Royce glided to the curb with impossible smoothness, earning a chorus of angry horns. Arthur didn't care. His eyes were fixed on the bench. The little girl was being gently pulled away by her mother, a young woman with tired eyes and a worried frown. The girl waved a final, cheerful goodbye to the old woman, who was now staring at the half-eaten cookie in her hand as if it were a holy relic. Arthur fumbled for the door handle, his movements clumsy. He had to know. He had to understand. He stepped out of the car, the humid city air hitting him like a physical blow. The noise, the smells of exhaust and street food were an assault after the sterile silence of his car. He was a creature of curated environments, and this was the wilderness. The mother and child were already a dozen yards away, merging into the afternoon crowd. He started after them, his expensive Italian shoes entirely unsuited for the cracked pavement. "Wait!" he called out, but his voice was lost in the urban din. They didn't hear him. He was losing them. A primal panic seized him, the same helpless terror he'd felt in the hospital all those years ago. He couldn't lose this. He couldn't. He broke into an awkward run, bumping past a man in a business suit who shot him a dirty look, then did a double take of recognition that Arthur was oblivious to. "Please wait!" he shouted again, louder this time. The woman heard him. She turned, her arm protectively around her daughter's shoulders. She saw a tall, impeccably dressed man with a face like a thundercloud bearing down on them, and her expression hardened with the defensive suspicion of a woman who had learned that life rarely sent well-dressed men running after her for good reasons. He skidded to a halt in front of them, breathing heavily, feeling foolish and exposed. He looked from the wary mother to the curious, upturned face of the little girl. She had wide, brown eyes, full of an uncomplicated light that he felt he could fall into forever. He opened his mouth to speak, but what could he say? "Where did you hear those words? Who told you to say that?" It sounded insane, accusatory. He was Arthur Vance. He didn't accost people on the street. He had people for that. The disconnect between his identity and his actions was jarring. I saw what you did," he managed, his voice still uneven. He gestured vaguely back toward the bench. "For that woman. It was kind." The mother's posture relaxed fractionally, but the suspicion remained. "She was sad," the little girl said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Her name, he learned later, was Lily. It was a dagger to the heart. His Lily. This Lily. The universe was either infinitely cruel or trying to tell him something he was not equipped to hear. "What? What did you say to her?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual, a monumental effort. The little girl looked up at her mother, who gave a slight nod. "I told her it was okay to be sad," she said, reciting the line with the same innocent gravity as before. "Because tears make room for the happy." Arthur felt his composure cracking again. He had to get away before he fell apart completely in front of them. He reached into his jacket, his hand closing around his wallet. It was his default solution. The answer to every problem. Money. He pulled out all the cash he had, several $1,000s in crisp $100 bills, his emergency fund for a world he never actually had to enter. He tried to press it into the mother's hand. "For her," he said, nodding toward the girl. "For her education. For the cookie." The woman, Sarah, recoiled as if he'd tried to hand her a snake. Her eyes, which he now saw were a deep, weary blue, flashed with an anger that was so fierce it startled him. "We don't need your money," she said, her voice low and tight. She pulled her daughter closer. "Come on, sweetie. Let's go." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing on the sidewalk with a fistful of useless currency. He had offered a solution and been rejected. He had tried to quantify an act of grace and been rebuffed. It was a transaction, and she had refused the terms. For the second time in 10 minutes, Arthur Vance was utterly, completely, lost. He watched them disappear into the crowd, the little yellow raincoat a beacon of light that was dimming with every step. He stood there for a long time, the money still clutched in his hand, feeling the weight of not its value but its impotence. Henderson had materialized silently by his side. "Sir?" Arthur slowly lowered his hand, the anger and confusion and grief swirling inside him into a toxic storm. He had built an empire on the principle that everything and everyone had a price. That woman had just looked him in the eye and told him he was wrong. He looked back at Henderson, his expression hardening back into its familiar mask of command. "Find them," he said, his voice cold as ice. "I want to know everything about them, the mother and the girl. I want to know where they live, where they work, where they shop for groceries. I want to know their names. I want to know who taught that little girl those words. Find them, Henderson. I don't care what it costs." The file landed on Arthur's vast obsidian desk 24 hours later. It was not delivered by Henderson, who was merely a driver, but by Marcus Thorne, the man Arthur paid an exorbitant amount of money to be his eyes, ears, and, when necessary, his ghost. Marcus was former MI6, a man who could blend into any background and extract information as easily as a dentist extracts a tooth. The file was thin, which was the first surprise. The lives of the poor and unconnected were often an open book. Sarah Miller, age 29, a widow. Her husband, a construction worker, had died 2 years prior in a scaffolding collapse. The settlement had been meager, swallowed almost instantly by medical bills and funeral costs. She had one child, Lily Miller, age 6. They lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a part of the city Arthur only ever saw from his helicopter. The building was owned by a holding company which, if one were to trace it back through 6 layers of shell corporations, was ultimately owned by Vance Holdings. The irony was so bitter it almost made him laugh. Sarah worked 2 jobs. By day, she was a cleaner at a downtown office building, another property in his portfolio. By night, she was a waitress at a greasy spoon diner on the edge of the industrial district. Her net income was a pittance, a rounding error in his daily interest earnings. The file detailed her debts: medical debt from her late husband's final days, student loans for a community college degree she never finished, a maxed-out credit card. She was behind on rent. An eviction notice was imminent. It was a portrait of quiet, desperate struggle, of a life lived on the knife's edge of financial ruin. But the file contained something else, something that made Arthur's blood run cold. Marcus had, with his typical intrusive efficiency, managed to retrieve a copy of Lily's birth certificate. Her full name was Lily Eleanor Miller. Eleanor. It had to be a coincidence. It was a common enough name. But coupled with the phrase, with the cookie, with the sudden, seismic impact on his own psyche, it felt like a targeted strike. The universe was no longer whispering. It was screaming in his face. The last page of the report was a transcript of Marcus's brief, covert conversation with a co-worker of Sarah's at the diner. Sarah? Yeah, she's a good one. Works harder than anyone. Does it all for her kid. That little girl is her whole world. Smart kid, too. Always saying the wisest things. Picks them up from her mom, I guess. Sarah's got this way of looking at the world. I don't know. Like she's looking for the good in it, even when there isn't much to find. He read the report 3 times, the sterile, factual language painting a picture more vivid than any photograph. He saw the tired lines on Sarah's face, the fierce pride in her eyes. He saw the little girl in the yellow raincoat, offering up her treasure to a stranger. And he saw the crushing weight of a system that he, more than anyone, had perfected. He was the landlord, threatening her with homelessness. He was the owner of the building she scrubbed clean for pennies. He was the embodiment of the relentless, impersonal capitalism that was grinding her into dust. And yet she had refused his money. He picked up his phone and dialed Marcus. "The report," he said, no preamble. "It's thorough." "It's what you pay me for," Marcus replied, his voice dry. "The name. Lily Eleanor." "A coincidence, presumably," Marcus said, though there was a questioning lilt in his voice. Arthur was silent for a moment, staring out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city sprawling below him. His city. His kingdom. Built on the backs of 1,000,000 Sarah Millers. "I want to help them," Arthur said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. He hadn't wanted to help anyone in years. He acquired. He dismantled. He profited. Help was a weak, inefficient concept. I can arrange an anonymous wire transfer through a charitable foundation. Untraceable. It would solve her immediate financial issues, Marcus suggested, ever the pragmatist. Arthur thought of Sarah's face, the flash of defiant pride. She'd refuse it, or be suspicious of it. It wouldn't work. "Then what do you propose?" This was the question. What did he propose? The old Arthur would have moved on, written it off as a strange, emotional anomaly. He would have instructed Marcus to make her problems disappear, pay off the landlord, kill the debt, with the detached air of a god swatting a fly. But the man who had wept in the back of his car was different. Something had been irrevocably altered. That little girl hadn't just made him cry. She had reminded him that he was human, and he was beginning to understand the terrible responsibility that came with it. "I need a different approach," Arthur said slowly, thinking aloud. "Something personal." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Marcus was likely processing the absurdity of the request. Arthur Vance did not do personal. "I'm not sure I understand, Arthur." "I know you don't," Arthur said, a strange sense of resolve hardening within him. "I'm not sure I do either, but I'm going to try. I need you to arrange something for me. I need a new suit." "A new suit?" Marcus asked, baffled. "I have your tailor's number." "No," Arthur said, a faint rust-colored smile touching his lips for the first time in ages. "Not that kind of suit. I need something cheap. Something that looks like it's seen better days. Something that would belong to a man who has lost his job and is looking for another. And I need a car. Not one of mine. A 10-year-old Ford, maybe. Something that blends in." and find out where Sarah Miller takes her daughter on a Saturday. Arthur, what are you planning? Marcus's voice was laced with genuine concern. I'm planning an experiment, Arthur replied, looking down at his manicured hands, hands that had never known a day of real labor. I'm going to step out of the tower and walk on the ground for a while. I need to understand why a woman with nothing would turn down a fistful of everything. The suit felt like a costume. It was cheap polyester, scratchy against his skin, and it smelled faintly of a warehouse. The Ford sedan handled like a barge, its engine making a disconcerting rattling noise that set his teeth on edge. Arthur Vance, a man who hadn't driven himself in 20 years, felt like an alien inhabiting a foreign body. He was parked across the street from the entrance to Vantage Public Library, a place he knew existed only as a line item in the city's budget, a recipient of a tax-deductible donation his foundation made every year. According to Marcus's intel, Sarah and Lily came here every Saturday morning. It was their ritual. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple and resisted the urge to wipe it away. He was supposed to look like a man down on his luck, not a billionaire playing dress-up. He rehearsed his story, the plausible fiction Marcus had concocted. He was Art, a former mid-level manager from a manufacturing firm that had recently been restructured, a classic corporate euphemism for being gutted and sold for parts, an activity he himself had presided over countless times. He was looking for work, feeling the pinch, trying to stay optimistic. It was a narrative so common it was practically invisible. He saw them before they saw him. Sarah was holding Lily's hand, pointing out something on a poster in the library window. Lily was skipping, her bright yellow raincoat, which she seemed to wear regardless of the weather, a cheerful beacon. His heart did a strange, painful lurch in his chest. He got out of the car, his movements stiff and unnatural. He clutched a folder filled with copies of a fake resume, his prop. Now for the hard part, the chance encounter. He started walking toward the library entrance, his eyes downcast, feigning preoccupation. He timed it so their paths would intersect just at the top of the wide stone steps. He was supposed to bump into Sarah, drop his folder, and initiate a conversation from there. It was a clumsy, amateurish plan, and he hated it. As he drew near, he could hear Lily's chatter. And then the dragon said he wasn't really scary. He just had a tummy ache, and the night gave him some ginger ale and they became best friends. Sarah laughed, a sound that was tired but genuine. That's a very kind way to look at it, sweetie. They reached the steps. This was it. Arthur braced himself, ready to execute his awkward maneuver, but he never got the chance. Just as he was about to accidentally collide with Sarah, an elderly man in front of them stumbled, his cane slipping on a loose stone. He cried out, pitching forward. Without a moment's hesitation, Sarah let go of Lily's hand and lunged, catching the man just before he hit the ground. Arthur froze, his own scripted drama completely forgotten. He watched as Sarah, with a strength that belied her slender frame, helped the man steady himself. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked, her voice full of concern. The man, flustered and embarrassed, thanked her profusely. Arthur just stood there, his prop folder suddenly feeling ridiculous. While Sarah was occupied, Lily, who had been told to stay put at the bottom of the steps, turned her attention to the new variable in her environment. Him. She looked at him with those impossibly bright, curious eyes. She took in his ill-fitting suit, his nervous posture, the folder clutched in his hand. He felt like he was being X-rayed. "Are you looking for a job?" she asked, her voice piping and direct. Children had no guile. It was terrifying. Arthur was momentarily speechless. He who could intimidate boards of directors with a single glance was rendered mute by a 6-year-old. He cleared his throat. Yes, I am. My mommy is looking for a new job, too," Lily confided, as if they were members of the same secret club. Her back hurts from the cleaning one and her feet hurt from the waitress one. She wants a sitting-down job. Do you want a sitting-down job? The sheer, unvarnished simplicity of it was disarming. He was used to conversations as complex as chess games, full of subtext and hidden agendas. This was clean. A sitting-down job sounds very nice, he said, his voice softer than he intended. Sarah, having ensured the old man was safely on his way, now turned and saw her daughter conversing with a stranger. A flicker of alarm crossed her face, and she hurried down the steps. "Lily, what did I tell you about talking to people you don't know?" she said, her tone gentle but firm. "But he's sad, Mommy," Lily said, pointing at Arthur. "I can see it in his eyes. He looks like that lady on the bench." Sarah's gaze met Arthur's. He saw recognition, then confusion, then that same guarded suspicion from the other day. She remembered the strange man with the fistful of money. He had to salvage this. He had to be Art, the unemployed manager. "I'm so sorry," he said, directing his words to Sarah. She asked me a question. I didn't mean to intrude." He extended a hand, the gesture automatic. "Art Jenkins." Sarah hesitated for a second before shaking it. Her hand was small and calloused, but her grip was firm. "Sarah Miller, and this is Lily." "I couldn't help but overhear," Arthur pressed on, forcing himself to stick to the script. "Your daughter mentioned you were looking for a new job." "Me too. It's tough out there." He gestured with his folder. "Just been to another interview. No luck." He was a terrible actor. He was sure she could see right through him, but Sarah's expression softened with a flicker of empathy. He had used the right words. Tough out there was the lingua franca of her world. "Don't I know it?" she sighed, a world of weariness in those 4 words. "Seems like you need 3 years of experience for an entry-level position these days." They stood in a moment of shared, albeit fabricated, commiseration. It was the most normal human interaction Arthur had experienced in decades, and it was entirely based on a lie. "Well," he said, trying to sound hopeful, "can't give up. Something will turn up." He smiled at Lily. "It was very nice to meet you, Lily. You're a very smart girl." "You should come to the library with us," Lily said suddenly, grabbing his hand. Her touch was warm and small, and it sent a jolt through him. "We're going to find books about castles. The librarian, Ms. Anya, knows all the best ones." "Oh, sweetie, I'm sure the man is busy," Sarah said, trying to gently extricate her daughter. But Arthur saw an opening, a deviation from the script that was far better than the original plan. This wasn't an interrogation. It was an invitation. "I'm not busy at all," he said quickly. "I've got nothing but time. I'd love to see the books about castles." Sarah looked hesitant, a battle of ingrained caution, and her daughter's hopeful face playing out in her eyes. It was Lily's earnest, pleading look that won. "All right," Sarah relented with a small sigh. "But just for a little while." And so, Arthur Vance, the man who owned half the city, walked into the public library for the first time in his life, holding the hand of a 6-year-old girl, pretending to be someone he was not, and feeling more real than he had in 30 years. The library was a cathedral of silence and the gentle scent of old paper. It was a world away from the cold glass and steel of his office. Here the currency was not money, but knowledge and imagination. He felt a sense of profound dislocation, like a deep-sea creature brought to the surface. Lily, however, was in her element. She led him through the aisles with the confidence of a seasoned explorer, her small voice a hushed but excited whisper as she pointed out her favorite sections. "This is where the adventure stories are, and over there is for science, but it's mostly about volcanoes. The castles are in the back." Sarah followed a few steps behind, her expression unreadable. She was watching him, he knew, trying to figure him out. He was an anomaly in her world, a well-spoken man in a cheap suit who seemed both lost and intensely focused. He tried to relax, to play his part. He asked questions about the books, about Lily's school, about the neighborhood. He learned that Sarah had grown up just a few miles from here, that she'd always dreamed of being a teacher but had to drop out of college when her husband got sick. She spoke of her life in a matter-of-fact way, without a trace of self-pity. It wasn't a complaint. It was just the weather of her life. They reached the history section, and Lily began pulling down heavy books with colorful pictures of knights and fortresses. She spread them out on a low wooden table and chattered away about drawbridges and catapults. Arthur found himself genuinely captivated, not by the castles, but by her unbridled joy. He saw in her the ghost of his own daughter, the same fierce intelligence and boundless imagination. The pain was a dull, constant ache, but for the first time it was accompanied by something else, a fragile warmth. Sarah sat down opposite him, a small, sad smile on her face as she watched Lily. "She loves it here," she said quietly. "It's our one real luxury. It doesn't cost anything to travel the world when you have a library card." "She's an amazing kid," Arthur said, and the words were utterly true. There was no artifice in them. "You've done a wonderful job with her." Sarah's gaze met his, and for the first time, the suspicion in her eyes seemed to recede, replaced by a flicker of connection. They were two single parents, a universe apart in circumstance, but joined by the common, fierce love for a child. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "She's the reason for everything. Some days, she's the only reason." An impulse, reckless and unplanned, seized him. "I saw you," he said, his voice low, "the other day, in the city, with your daughter and the woman on the bench." Sarah's guard went right back up. Her spine straightened. The man with the money. It wasn't a question. "I was having a bad day," he said, scrambling for a plausible explanation. "I had just come from another rejection. Seeing your daughter do something so decent, it hit me. I was clumsy. I apologize. I didn't mean to offend you." He was mixing his real emotions with his fictional persona, and the result felt surprisingly authentic. He had been having a bad day. A bad 30 years. And that little girl's kindness had hit him like a lightning bolt. Sarah studied his face, searching for something. "Why did it make you want to give us money?" People see things like that all the time. They don't usually try to throw thousands of dollars at it. He had to be careful. The truth was a minefield. "I have a daughter," he said, and this part was true, even if the tense was wrong. He forced himself to use the present tense. "She's about Lily's age. We don't live together. It's complicated. Seeing Lily reminded me of her, of the good in the world. It was an impulse, a stupid one." The lie felt slick and ugly in his mouth, but it was a necessary shield. To his surprise, Sarah's expression softened again, this time with genuine empathy. A broken family was something she could understand. It was a sadness that fit the shabby suit and the worried eyes of Art Jenkins. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said. "That can't be easy." "It isn't," he said, the truth of that statement a weight in his chest. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound Lily's happy humming as she turned the pages of a book. It was a comfortable silence, a fragile truce built on a foundation of lies. He knew he should leave. He had accomplished his mission. He had made contact, established a persona. But he didn't want to go. This small, quiet pocket of the universe felt more meaningful than his entire empire. "Mommy, look!" Lily cried, pointing to a picture. "This one has a secret passage." Sarah smiled and leaned over to look. Arthur watched them, a father and daughter, sharing a moment of simple discovery. A profound, aching loneliness washed over him. He was a spectator in his own life, and for the first time, he was a spectator in someone else's. And he realized with a sickening jolt that he preferred it here. He had all the power in the world, but he would have traded all of it, every stock, every building, every last dollar, to be part of a moment as real and as pure as that one. He finally stood up to leave. "I should go," he said. "Thank you for letting me intrude on your Saturday." "It was no intrusion," Sarah said, and she sounded like she meant it. As he turned to walk away, Lily ran up and wrapped her small arms around his leg in a fierce hug. "Bye, Mr. Art," she said, her cheek pressed against the cheap polyester of his trousers. "I hope you find a good sitting-down job really soon." Arthur froze. His entire body went rigid. No one had touched him with such uncomplicated affection in 30 years. He felt a tremor run through him, and for a terrifying second, he thought he was going to cry again. He reached down and awkwardly patted her on the head, his hand trembling slightly. "Thank you, Lily," he whispered, his throat tight. "Me too." He walked out of the library and back to the rattling Ford sedan, the warmth of that small hug still radiating through him. The experiment had been a success, but it had also gone terribly wrong. He had wanted to understand Sarah Miller. Instead, he was beginning to understand Arthur Vance, and he was horrified by what he was seeing. He had gone in with a tactical objective, and he had come out with a wound in his heart he didn't know how to heal. The days that followed were a study in cognitive dissonance. By day, he was Arthur Vance, a ruthless corporate predator. He chaired board meetings, approved hostile takeovers, and dismantled companies with surgical precision. He moved billions of dollars with a flick of his pen, his mind a cold, efficient machine. But in the evenings, alone in his cavernous penthouse apartment that overlooked the city, he would shed the skin of Arthur Vance and become the ghost of Art Jenkins. He read the thin file on Sarah and Lily Miller over and over again, the dry facts imprinting themselves on his mind. He knew Lily's favorite flavor of ice cream was strawberry. He knew Sarah hummed when she was worried. He knew they ate macaroni and cheese for dinner 3 nights a week. Marcus, ever efficient, had provided updates. The eviction notice had been officially served. They had 2 weeks. The news hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a game. This was a real family, with a real deadline. His first instinct, the old instinct, was to intervene directly. A single phone call and the landlord, his own subsidiary, would back off. The debt would be erased, but he knew that wasn't the answer. It would expose his deception, and more importantly, it would rob Sarah of her dignity, the one thing she seemed to prize above all else. Handouts were an insult to her strength. He had to find another way, a way to help that felt like an opportunity, not charity. He had to be Art Jenkins and solve the problem from the ground up. He spent hours online, not scrolling through stock market data, but through job listings for low-skilled administrative work. He looked at the world through Sarah's eyes, and what he saw was bleak. A landscape of minimum-wage jobs with no benefits, no security, and no future. He saw the systemic traps, the cycles of poverty that were invisible from his penthouse but were starkly, brutally real on the ground. He was the architect of this system, and he was now trapped within it, trying to find a way out for someone else. He decided on a new plan, more audacious and far more personal than the first. He called Marcus. "I need you to create a job," he said. "A real one. I'm starting a new company." "A new company?" Marcus sounded stunned. "What kind of company?" "A small one, a logistical support company, something that could plausibly be a startup. We'll call it Miller Jenkins Logistics." "Miller Jenkins?" She needs a job. And Art Jenkins needs a job, Arthur explained, the logic feeling sound in his head even as he heard the insanity of it. We'll be the first 2 employees. I need you to lease a small office space, something modest. Furnish it with second-hand desks. Create a website, a phone number, a corporate identity. It needs to look real, Marcus. It needs to be a legitimate business. Arthur, this is elaborate. What will this company do? Nothing. Everything. It will be a front. For now, its only purpose is to hire Sarah Miller. We'll offer her a position as an office administrator, decent salary, full benefits, flexible hours, so she can be there for Lily. And I will hire myself as, I don't know, a project manager. You're going to give yourself a job in your own fake company? Marcus's voice was flat with disbelief. I have to be there, Arthur insisted. I have to make sure it works. I have to be Art. The apathetic part of him was screaming in protest. But I don't need to do any of this. This is a waste of my time. But it had grown increasingly quiet since he met Lily. He had long since stopped listening to it. It took Marcus 4 days to work his magic. By the end of the week, Miller Jenkins Logistics was a registered entity with a physical address and a functioning website that promised innovative supply chain solutions. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. The next step was to get the job offer to Sarah. Arthur couldn't just call her. It would be too suspicious. The opportunity had to seem like a stroke of luck, a coincidence. He remembered her mentioning she'd dropped out of community college. Marcus pulled some strings. A former professor of Sarah's, a kindly old woman who remembered her as a bright and promising student, was contacted by a recruiter from a new company, Miller Jenkins, looking for someone with Sarah's profile. The professor, delighted to help a former student, eagerly passed on the recommendation. The bait was laid. 2 days later, Arthur was sitting at his cheap metal desk in the small, sterile office of Miller Jenkins Logistics, his heart pounding in his chest. He was wearing another one of his Art Jenkins suits. Across from him, Sarah Miller was perched nervously on the edge of her chair, clutching her resume. She had gotten the call from her old professor and had come in for an interview. The interview was with him. So, he said, trying to sound like a professional mid-level manager. Your professor, Mrs. Gable, spoke very highly of you. Sarah managed a small, nervous smile. She was always very kind. I wasn't her best student, I'm afraid. She said you were one of her brightest, that you had a real mind for organization and detail, but that circumstances got in the way. He was quoting directly from the dossier Marcus had prepared on the professor, and it felt ghoulish, manipulative. But it was working. Sarah's posture straightened slightly. It was clear no one had called her bright in a very long time. He went through the motions of a real interview, asking her about her skills, her work history. She answered honestly, without embellishment. She talked about managing inventory at the diner, about scheduling cleaning crews at the office building. She was underselling herself, seeing only the menial tasks and not the transferable skills of logistics, management, and problem-solving that she used every single day just to survive. You have more experience in logistics than you think, he told her, and he meant it. Managing 2 jobs, a child, a household budget. That's project management in its purest form. She looked at him, a flicker of surprise and gratitude in her eyes. He was seeing her, not as a cleaner or a waitress, but as a capable human being. And that, he was beginning to realize, was more valuable than any amount of money. He explained the role. Office administrator, responsible for scheduling, bookkeeping, client communications. He laid out the terms. A salary that was 3 times what she was making now, full health and dental insurance, and a 9-to-5 schedule. Her eyes widened as he spoke. It was a lifeline, a fantasy, a dream she had long since abandoned. It sounds too good to be true, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The truth was a razor blade on his tongue. It is too good to be true. It's all a lie, a fabrication built for you by a lonely, grieving billionaire who is playing God with your life. But he couldn't say that. He had to keep the fiction alive. "We're a new company," he said, leaning on the cover story. "We're small, but we're well-funded. We believe in investing in good people. The owner, he's a bit of an idealist, wants to build a company that treats its employees right." "The owner?" she asked. "Is he here?" "No," Arthur said quickly. "He's a silent partner. Very hands-off. It's just you and me for now." He took a deep breath. "The job is yours, Sarah, if you want it." Tears welled in her eyes. She tried to blink them back, but one escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of profound, earth-shattering relief. He had seen people weep in his boardroom when he destroyed their life's work. He had never seen anyone weep with gratitude. The sight was devastating. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice choked with emotion. "You have no idea. You have no idea what this means." "Oh, but I do," he thought, a cold knot of guilt tightening in his stomach. "I know exactly what it means. It means I'm a liar. It means I've built your salvation on a foundation of deceit." And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that if she ever found out the truth, she would hate him for it, and she would be right. Starting a fake logistics company from scratch, even one with only 2 employees, turned out to be more complicated than Arthur had anticipated. He had built a global empire, but he knew nothing about the mundane realities of running a small business. There were invoices to be designed, payroll systems to be set up, a coffee machine to be purchased. He found himself spending his days as Art Jenkins, grappling with accounting software and trying to figure out how to unjam the second-hand printer. In the evenings, he would return to his penthouse and, via a secure line, command Marcus to solve the problems that Art couldn't. "We need clients, Marcus," he'd said one night, pacing his marble floors. "We can't be a logistics company with no logistics. It'll look suspicious." The next day, 3 small, legitimate businesses, all secretly owned by other Vance Holdings subsidiaries, contacted Miller Jenkins Logistics and offered them lucrative long-term contracts. The work was real. There were real trucks, real shipments, real schedules to manage. The fake company had accidentally become a real one, and Sarah flourished. Freed from the crushing weight of her 2 survival jobs, she bloomed. The tired, worried lines around her eyes began to fade. She was smart, efficient, and relentlessly organized. She mastered the scheduling software in a day, streamlined their invoicing system in a week, and started pointing out inefficiencies in their deliberately inefficient supply chains. She was a natural. Arthur watched her, a strange mix of pride and terror in his heart. He was proud of the woman she was becoming, the woman she had always been underneath the exhaustion. But he was terrified because her success was making the lie more and more real, and therefore more and more dangerous. Their relationship settled into a comfortable, professional rhythm. He was Art, her slightly awkward, slightly sad boss. They made small talk about the weather and Lily's latest adventures in first grade. He learned that Lily was saving up her allowance to buy a telescope because she wanted to be an astronaut. On a whim, Arthur, in his billionaire guise, had a state-of-the-art telescope delivered anonymously to their apartment. He imagined Lily's delight and felt a pang of something warm and unfamiliar. It was a dangerous game, living 2 lives, but he found he was beginning to prefer the world of Art Jenkins. The problems there were small, manageable. The victories were tangible. Unjamming the printer felt more satisfying than closing a billion-dollar deal. But the real joy, the real reason he continued the charade, was Lily. Sarah, with her new stable schedule, was able to bring Lily to the office for the last hour of the day while she finished up her work. The little girl would sit at an empty desk with a box of crayons and a stack of printer paper, drawing fantastical pictures of castles and spaceships. She adopted Arthur as her unofficial uncle. She would show him her drawings, tell him her stories, and ask him endless, impossibly direct questions. "Mr. Art, why don't you ever smile with your eyes?" she asked him one day, looking at him with unnerving perception. He had no answer. Another time she drew a picture of her family. There was her mom and her grandmother, and a smiling stick figure of her dad with wings. And next to them, she had drawn a tall, clumsy-looking man in a suit. "That's you," she said, pointing. "You're our friend." He had to excuse himself and go to the men's room, where he splashed cold water on his face, his reflection a stranger's. The lie was eating him alive, but the alternative, leaving them, returning to his empty, silent life, was unthinkable. He was an addict, and his drug was this small, borrowed family. The illusion, however, was fragile. One afternoon, his two worlds collided. He was on the phone in his office, speaking as Arthur Vance to his legal team about a complex international merger. He was pacing, his voice clipped and authoritative, his mind 1,000 miles away in a boardroom in Tokyo. He didn't hear Sarah come in. He was in the middle of a sentence. "The regulatory hurdles in Singapore are a non-issue. I've already spoken to the finance minister." When he looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, her face a mask of confusion. He froze. The blood drained from his face. He had broken the cardinal rule. He had mixed the streams. He quickly ended the call, stammering a clumsy excuse. "Wrong number," he said, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Telemarketers. You know how it is." She looked at him, her brow furrowed. "You sounded different," she said slowly. "Like that man on the phone. The one who owns the company." He forced a laugh. "It sounded like a dog barking." "Me? No, I wish, just practicing my power voice." It was a pathetic lie, and he knew she didn't buy it. The seed of doubt had been planted. For the rest of the day she was quiet, distant. The easy camaraderie between them was gone, replaced by a tense, polite formality. He knew he had made a terrible mistake. The walls were closing in. That evening he called Marcus in a panic. "She suspects something. I slipped up. It's all going to fall apart." "I told you this was a reckless plan, Arthur," Marcus said, his voice devoid of any "I told you so" satisfaction. It was simply a statement of fact. "What's the end game here? You can't be Art Jenkins forever." "I know," Arthur whispered, slumping into a chair in his vast, empty living room. The setting sun painted the city in hues of gold and orange, but he felt nothing but cold dread. "What do I do, Marcus?" "You have two choices," Marcus said. "You end it. You have Art Jenkins get a job offer in another city. He disappears from their lives. The company continues to run. Sarah keeps her job, and they never know the truth. Or you tell her." Both options felt like a death sentence. To disappear would be to cut out a piece of his own soul. To tell her the truth would be to watch her look at him with betrayal and hatred. To destroy the one pure thing he had found in a lifetime of cynical transactions. He agonized over the decision for days. He was distant and distracted at the office. Sarah watched him, her own silence a mirror of his turmoil. The lie had become a chasm between them. He was on the verge of choosing the coward's way out, of having Art Jenkins simply vanish when fate intervened. He received a call from the head of the pediatric oncology ward at Vantage General Hospital, a ward he funded with a massive annual donation in his daughter's name. It was a call he received every year, a perfunctory thank you that he usually endured with stoic detachment. But this time, The doctor said something that made his world tilt on its axis. I'm calling with some particularly good news, Mr. Vance. Thanks to your latest round of funding for the experimental gene therapy program, we've been able to accept a new patient, a transfer from the public clinic. A case we would have previously considered hopeless. A young woman named Sarah Miller. Her mother, it seems. Arthur didn't hear the rest of the sentence. The phone slipped from his hand for the second time in as many months. Sarah. Her mother. He hadn't even known she was sick. The file had mentioned a grandmother, but not the severity of her illness. The system he had set up to honor the memory of his daughter was about to save the family of the woman he had been lying to for weeks. The irony was staggering, a cosmic joke of breathtaking cruelty and grace. He now understood that he had no choice at all. The universe had been pushing him in this direction from the moment a little girl in a yellow raincoat offered a cookie to a stranger. The time for lies was over. He had to tell her the truth, and he had to do it now. Whatever the consequences, he had to face them. He was no longer just the architect of her problems. He was, by a staggering twist of fate, the architect of her hope. And he had to pray that the latter would be enough to forgive the former. He found her in the hospital cafeteria, staring into a styrofoam cup of coffee, as if it held the answers to the universe. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and hollowed out with fear and exhaustion. The confident, capable woman from the office was gone, replaced by a terrified daughter. He approached her table, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous, sterile room. He was still wearing his Art Jenkins suit, and he had never felt more like an imposter. She looked up as he approached, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Art, what are you doing here?" "Lily told me." He lied, the untruths coming so easily now. "She said her grandma was sick and that you were at the hospital. I came to see if you were okay." It was a plausible story. Lily, in her childish innocence, would have mentioned it. Sarah seemed to accept it, too tired to question the details. "She's not good, Art," she whispered, her voice cracking. It's leukemia. The doctors at the clinic said there was nothing more they could do. Palliative care, that was it." She took a shuddering breath. "And then, this morning, we got a call. Out of nowhere, a specialist from this hospital, Vantage General, said there's an experimental program, a gene therapy trial. Said they reviewed her case and she's a perfect candidate, said it could save her life." She looked at him, her eyes wide with a desperate, fragile hope. "It feels like a miracle. A 1 in a million chance. I don't understand it. People like us. We don't get miracles." This was it. The moment had arrived. His heart felt like a trapped bird beating against his ribs. He sat down opposite her, the cheap Formica tabletop cold beneath his hands. "Sarah," he began, his voice low and unsteady, "it's not a miracle." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath, the sterile, antiseptic air of the hospital filling his lungs. "The program. The gene therapy trial. I fund it." Sarah stared at him, her expression blank with incomprehension. "You? But you're Art Jenkins. You're just like me." "No," he said, the word tasting like ash. "I'm not. My name isn't Art Jenkins. My real name. My name is Arthur Vance." He watched the name register. He saw her mind working, connecting the dots. Vance. The Vance Tower. Vantage City. He saw the confusion curdle into disbelief, then into dawning, sickening horror. Her face, which had been filled with hope just moments before, shuddered completely. The warmth vanished, replaced by a glacial coldness. "Vance," she whispered, the name a foreign, poisonous thing on her tongue. "You're him?" "Yes. The man on the street. With the money." It wasn't a question. "Yes. Miller Jenkins Logistics. The job. The contracts." Was it all? It was all me, he said, forcing himself to meet her gaze. The betrayal in her eyes was a physical thing. It hit him harder than any boardroom defeat, any market crash. It was a lie. All of it. She flinched as if he had slapped her. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the linoleum floor. Why? She breathed, her voice a mixture of rage and pain. Why would you do this? Was this some kind of sick game? A rich man's twisted social experiment? Did you get a good laugh out of watching the little poor woman jump through your hoops? No, he said, standing up as well. No, it was never that. I wanted to help. Help? She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed in the quiet cafeteria. You call this helping? You lied to me. You manipulated me. You made me believe in something that wasn't real. You made me trust you. My daughter hugged you. She called you our friend. Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, and each one found its mark. Sarah, please, just let me explain. Explain what? How you used your money and power to orchestrate my entire life for the past month? There's no explanation for that. It's monstrous. She backed away from him, her hands held up as if to ward him off. Stay away from me. Stay away from my daughter. I don't want your job. I don't want your help. I don't want your money. I don't want your miracle. She turned and fled, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the cafeteria. He had told the truth, and it had destroyed everything. He watched her go, a hollow, aching void opening up inside him. He had lost. He had tried to connect, to do something good, and he had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. He had built a bridge of lies, and when he finally revealed its foundations, the whole thing had come crashing down. He had never felt so utterly, completely alone. He had sought to heal a 30-year-old wound, and all he had managed to do was inflict a fresh one on the one person who had inadvertently started to show him the way out of his own darkness. He didn't go back to the office of Miller Jenkins Logistics. There was no point. The company, the job, the persona of Art Jenkins. It was all dust. He retreated to his penthouse, the gilded cage that suddenly felt more like a prison than ever before. He canceled his meetings, ignored his calls. For 2 days he did nothing but stare out at the city, the monument to his success that now felt like a testament to his failure. Marcus was the only one he spoke to. She wants nothing to do with me, Arthur told him, his voice flat and lifeless. She's quitting the job. She's refusing the treatment for her mother. She can't do that, Marcus said. The doctors won't allow it. Her mother has already been admitted. The treatment protocol has started. Sarah's consent isn't required at this stage. Her mother gave it herself before her condition worsened. It was a small, cold comfort. The machinery of his power was moving on without him, saving a life against the wishes of the very person he was trying to reach. He was a ghost in his own grand design. It doesn't matter, Arthur said. I've lost her. I've lost them. What did you expect, Arthur? Marcus asked, his tone unusually gentle. You built a relationship on a lie. A kind lie, perhaps, but a lie nonetheless. Trust is a fragile thing. Once broken, it doesn't just snap back together. Marcus was right. Arthur had approached Sarah's life like a corporate restructuring. He had seen a problem and engineered a solution, forgetting that human hearts don't operate like balance sheets. He had wanted to fix her life without ever truly being a part of it, and the deception was the price of that distance. On the 3rd day, a package arrived. It was a small, lumpy manila envelope addressed to Art Jenkins at the office and forwarded by a confused security guard. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were 2 items. The first was a drawing, done in crayon on a piece of printer paper. It was the picture Lily had drawn of her family, with the tall, awkward stick figure of Art standing beside them. But now, a thick, angry red line had been drawn through his figure. He had been crossed out. The second item was a simple, handwritten note from Sarah. It wasn't angry or accusatory. It was worse. It was calm, dignified, and utterly devastating. "Mr. Vance," it began, "I am returning this. We won't be needing it anymore. Thank you for the opportunity you provided. My mother's treatment is proceeding, and for that, I am grateful in a way I can never properly express. That is a debt I will have to live with, but I cannot accept anything else from you. The foundation of our acquaintance was not real, and therefore none of it was. Please do not try to contact me or my daughter again. We wish to be left alone." He read the note a dozen times, each word a fresh turn of the knife. She had separated the man from the money. She would accept the gift of life for her mother, the anonymous act of philanthropy, but she would not under any circumstances accept him. He had been surgically excised from their lives. He placed the drawing and the note on his obsidian desk, a shrine to his own folly. And then he did something he hadn't done since he was a boy. He went to his father's study, a room he kept preserved like a museum, and poured himself a glass of scotch. Then another, and another. He drank until the sharp edges of his grief were dulled, until the city lights outside his window blurred into a meaningless smear. He drank to forget the betrayal in Sarah's eyes, the red crayon line through his heart, the unbearable silence of his life. He drank until he passed out, slumped in a leather armchair that was worth more than Sarah Miller's entire net worth. A king alone in his castle, utterly, finally defeated. He woke to the insistent buzzing of his phone. His head was pounding, his mouth tasted like rust, and a sliver of gray morning light was cutting through the blinds. He ignored the call. It buzzed again. And again. With a groan, he fumbled for the phone, squinting at the screen. It was Marcus. He answered, his voice a raw croak. "What? You need to get down to the hospital," Marcus said, his voice urgent, stripped of its usual calm. "Now." "What is it? What's happened?" Arthur's mind, foggy with alcohol, jumped to the worst possible conclusion. Sarah's mother. "It's not her mother," Marcus said, anticipating his fear. "The treatment is working. Her vitals are stable. It's Lily." A spear of ice shot through Arthur's chest, clearing the alcoholic haze in an instant. "Lily? What's wrong with Lily? Is she hurt?" "She's here, in the pediatric ward. She collapsed at school. High fever. They think it's meningitis." The word hung in the air, a venomous, terrifying thing. Meningitis. The same disease that had taken his Lily. His breath caught in his throat. He felt the floor tilt beneath him. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare. A cruel, impossible twist of a knife that was already buried to the hilt. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice a choked whisper. He moved faster than he had in years, showering and dressing in a blur of frantic energy. He didn't bother with a suit. He threw on the first thing he could find, a pair of simple trousers and a dark sweater. He wasn't Arthur Vance, the billionaire. He was just a terrified man. Henderson drove with a speed and aggression Arthur had never seen, weaving through the morning traffic as if the car were an extension of Arthur's own desperate will. During the ride, Arthur's mind was a maelstrom of guilt and terror. This was his fault. He had brought this into their lives. He had upset their delicate balance, caused Sarah stress, and now her child was sick. It was a punishment, a cosmic retribution for his lies and his hubris. He burst into the pediatric ward, a place he knew all too well. The pastel-colored walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, the forced cheerfulness of the nurse's station. It was all exactly as he remembered, a ghost of a memory brought to life. He saw Sarah immediately. She was standing outside a room, her back pressed against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to keep from falling apart. She was talking to a doctor, her face a mask of anguish. She looked so small, so utterly broken. All the anger he had expected to see in her was gone, replaced by the pure, undiluted terror of a parent. He stopped a dozen feet away, unseen. He couldn't bring himself to approach her, to intrude on this sacred, awful moment. He could only watch. The doctor put a comforting hand on her shoulder and said something before moving on. Sarah sagged against the wall, her head bowed, a silent scream trapped in her throat. And then he saw the other person in the hallway. An old woman, frail but with a fire in her eyes, sitting in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse. It was Sarah's mother. The gene therapy had worked a small miracle already. She was weak, but she was lucid. She saw her daughter's distress and gestured for the nurse to bring her closer. She took Sarah's hand, her own thin and papery, and began to speak to her in a low, soothing voice. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see their effect. He saw Sarah draw strength from her mother, a small flicker of resilience returning to her eyes. He saw 3 generations of women, bound by love and fear, holding each other up in the face of the abyss. He was the outsider, the ghost, the liar. He had no place here. He turned to leave, to retreat back to his empty tower, and let them face this alone. His presence would only be a source of pain and distraction, but as he turned, a small voice called his name. Not his name. The other name. Mr. Art. He looked down. A little boy pulling an IV stand was looking up at him from the doorway of another room. Arthur frowned, confused. He didn't know this child. "Are you here to see Lily?" the boy asked. "She's my friend. She got sick." Yes," Arthur stammered. "But I don't think I should—" Before he could finish, Sarah looked up. Her eyes, red and swollen, met his across the hallway. There was no anger, no hatred. Just a bottomless ocean of fear and exhaustion. She had no energy left for anything else. The sight of him seemed to be just one more surreal detail in a day that had spun out of control. He saw the flicker of a question in her eyes. Why was he here? And in that moment, he knew he couldn't leave. His lies, his mistakes, his wealth. None of it mattered. All that mattered was the little girl in that room and the terrified mother in the hallway. He walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "I heard," he said, his voice quiet. "Marcus told me. I'm so sorry, Sarah." She didn't answer. She just looked at him, her defenses completely gone. "My daughter," he said, the words tearing at his throat. Her name was Lily, too. She was 6. It was meningitis. The confession hung in the air between them. It was the last, most important piece of the truth, the key that unlocked everything. He saw the flicker of understanding in her eyes, the shared name, the words about tears making room for the happy, his obsession, his lies. It all snapped into place for her, not as a rich man's cruel game, but as a grieving father's desperate, clumsy attempt to reconnect with a ghost. Her expression, which had been so hard and unforgiving, softened. The anger was washed away by a wave of shared, unbearable grief. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She just took a half step toward him, a silent acknowledgement of their shared, tragic ground. A nurse came out of Lily's room. "You can see her now," she said gently. "Just for a minute." Sarah looked at her mother, then at him. And then, in a gesture that shattered what was left of his heart, she held out her hand. "Come with me," she whispered. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. It was something more elemental. It was a recognition that in the face of a parent's worst nightmare, there are no enemies. There are only people who understand. He took her hand, his large trembling one enveloping hers, and together, They walked into the room to see their Lily. The little girl in the hospital bed looked small and fragile, a pale imitation of the vibrant, skipping child in the yellow raincoat. She was hooked up to monitors that beeped and whirred, the soundtrack of his nightmares. An IV line snaked into her small hand, but she was awake. Her eyes, drowsy with fever and medication, fluttered open as they approached. A faint smile touched her lips. "Mommy?" she whispered, her voice a tiny thread of sound. "Mr. Art." She used his fake name, the name he had come to cherish, and it was both a comfort and a stab of guilt. He had no right to be here, to be receiving the affection of this sick child. But Sarah didn't correct her. She squeezed his hand tighter, a silent plea for him to stay, to be the friend her daughter believed him to be. They stood by her bedside, a strange, broken family forged in lies and grief. Sarah smoothed Lily's hair back from her forehead, murmuring soft, comforting words. Arthur could only stand and watch, a tidal wave of memory and regret washing over him. He remembered standing by another bed, in another room just like this one, holding his wife's hand as they watched their own Lily fade away. The technology was better now. The doctors were more optimistic, but the fear, the crushing, helpless fear, was exactly the same. He felt a small tug on his sleeve. He looked down. Lily was looking at him, her eyes surprisingly clear for a moment. "Are you sad, Mr. Art?" she whispered. "Your eyes are leaking." He hadn't even realized he was crying. Silent tears were tracking down his face. He quickly wiped them away with his free hand. "I'm just worried about you, Lilybug," he said, using a nickname he had no right to. "You have to be very brave and get better." "I'm trying," she said, her eyelids drooping. "Will you tell me a story?" He looked at Sarah, lost. What could he say? Sarah gave him a small, encouraging nod. Her eyes told him to just be the man her daughter needed him to be in this moment. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice thick with emotion. He told her a story his own Lily had loved. A story about a brave little knight who wasn't afraid of a grumpy dragon because she knew he just needed a friend. He spoke of castles and secret passages, of ginger ale and unlikely friendships. He poured all of his pain, all of his love for the daughter he had lost, into the simple, gentle tale. And as he spoke, he watched Lily's breathing even out, her face relax, her small hand go limp in her mother's. She had drifted off to sleep. They stayed there for a long time, in the quiet, beeping sanctuary of the room. The silence between him and Sarah was no longer tense or angry. It was filled with a shared, unspoken understanding. When a nurse finally came to gently usher them out, Sarah didn't let go of his hand. They walked back into the hallway where her mother was waiting. Sarah introduced them. "Mom, this is Arthur Vance. He's a friend." The lie had become a complicated, painful truth. Over the next few days, a new routine formed. Arthur would spend his days at the hospital. He shed the skin of the billionaire completely. He was just Arthur. He brought Sarah coffee. He sat with her mother, listening to her stories about Sarah's childhood. He read to Lily when she was awake. He became a quiet, steady presence in the background of their vigil. He used his resources, but he did it quietly, personally. He had the best infectious disease specialist in the country flown in overnight for a consultation. He arranged for Sarah's mother to be moved to a comfortable private room so she could recuperate nearby. He had healthy meals delivered to the hospital for Sarah, who kept forgetting to eat. These were not the grand, impersonal gestures of a billionaire throwing money at a problem. They were the actions of a man who was trying, clumsily, to care for a family he had broken his way into. Sarah watched him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and confusion. She had seen the monster, the manipulative liar, but now she was seeing the man, the grieving father. One afternoon, as they sat in the waiting room while Lily was undergoing a spinal tap, she finally broke the silence between them. "Why did you lie about your name?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Why not just be Arthur Vance from the beginning?" He looked at his hands, at the faint calluses that were beginning to form from, he wasn't even sure what, from living. "Because Arthur Vance is a brand," he said, the words coming slowly, painfully. "He's a ghost in a machine. He doesn't talk to people on the street. He doesn't go to libraries. He doesn't know how." And I was ashamed. "Ashamed of what? Your money?" "Ashamed of what I had become," he said, finally looking at her. "A man who had everything and felt nothing. Your daughter. She woke me up. She made me feel something for the first time in 30 years. And I was terrified of scaring that feeling away. Art Jenkins wasn't a lie I told you. He was a man I wanted to be. A man who could be a friend to a little girl and her mother. A man who deserved their kindness." He took a deep breath. "And I knew that if I came to you as Arthur Vance, all you would see was the money. You would never have let me in. And you would have been right to do so." Sarah was silent for a long time, processing his words. "The day we met in front of the library," she said finally, "you said you had a daughter Lily's age. You said it was complicated." "It is complicated," he said, his voice raw. "She is Lily's age forever. She is always with me, and she is always gone. That's the most complicated thing in the world." A tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. But this time, it was not a tear of anger or betrayal. It was a tear of empathy. "I'm so sorry, Arthur," she whispered, using his real name for the first time. It was an absolution. It was a beginning. The news from the doctors was good. They had caught the infection early. The antibiotics were working. Lily was responding well. She was weak, but she was going to be okay. The relief was a physical thing, a wave that washed through the sterile hallways of the hospital, carrying away the tension and the fear. The day Lily was discharged, Arthur was there. He watched as Sarah's mother, looking stronger than she had in years, hugged her granddaughter. He watched as Sarah carefully buckled Lily into the back of a car, a new, safe car that he had arranged for, a gift he had told her was from the hospital's donor fund. As Sarah was about to get into the driver's seat, she turned to him. "Are you coming with us?" she asked. The question was simple, but it held the weight of their entire shared history. It was an invitation, an acceptance. "I'd like that very much," he said, a real smile, a smile that reached his eyes, spreading across his face. He got into the passenger seat, and as they pulled away from the hospital, from the place of so much pain and fear and ultimately healing, he felt a sense of peace he had never known. The journey wasn't over. There were still truths to be reconciled, a trust to be rebuilt. But for the first time, the road ahead didn't look like a solitary, empty highway. It looked like a path he would be walking with others. The months that followed were a quiet, gentle unfolding. Miller Jenkins Logistics was quietly absorbed into the Vance Foundation. Its mission changed from a corporate front to a legitimate social enterprise. It now specialized in providing stable, well-paying administrative jobs to single mothers transitioning out of poverty. Sarah, at Arthur's insistence, was made its director. She had found her sitting-down job, and she was using it to help women just like her. Arthur stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his empire. He delegated, he trusted, he empowered. He found that the machine ran just fine without his hand on the lever every single moment. He started spending his afternoons not in boardrooms, but in parks and libraries. He, Sarah, and Lily formed a new kind of family. They had picnics. They flew kites. They went to the zoo. He taught Lily how to play chess, and she taught him how to see the world, not as a series of assets and liabilities, but as a place of wonder and magic. He learned to laugh again, a deep, genuine sound that came from his soul. Sarah's mother made a full recovery, her new lease on life making her younger than her years. She doted on Lily and treated Arthur with a warm, knowing affection, as if she understood the broken pieces inside him that her granddaughter was helping to put back together. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost a year after they had met, they were at the park. Lily, her energy fully restored, was laughing as she chased a flurry of golden leaves. Arthur and Sarah sat on a bench, not so different from the one where it had all started, watching her. "Do you ever think about that day?" Sarah asked quietly. "The first day?" "Every day," he admitted. "I was a different person then." "We both were," she said. She reached over and took his hand. It was a simple, comfortable gesture now, an easy intimacy that had been earned through shared crisis and quiet understanding. "That woman on the bench," she said. "Lily still asks about her sometimes. She wants to know if the happy came back in." "Did it?" Arthur asked, his gaze on Lily, the little girl in the now slightly too small yellow raincoat. "I think it did," Sarah said, her eyes on him. "I think a little girl in a yellow coat reminded a lot of people that there's always room for more happy." Lily ran over to them then, her face flushed, her eyes sparkling. She threw her arms around Arthur's neck. "I love you, Mr. Art," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. He closed his eyes, holding her tight, the name no longer a lie but a term of endearment, a reminder of the man he had become. He looked over Lily's head at Sarah, at her warm, smiling face, and he felt a sense of rightness, of coming home. The gaping wound in his heart, the one he had carried for 30 years, was no longer empty. It had been filled, not with a replacement for what he had lost, but with something new. Something precious. He had set out to solve the mystery of a little girl's words and had, in the process, solved the mystery of his own life. He looked at the setting sun, at the little girl laughing in his arms, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would spend the rest of his days looking for the quiet miracles hidden in plain sight, the ones you can only see when you finally, truly open your heart.